Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. Joining me today is Jake Wilks. Jake is with a company called Firefly, and I've really enjoyed using the Firefly Recovery products, and our athletes have certainly loved the impact that they have on them as well. Jake and I dive into Firefly today, what it is, what it does, the science behind it, and so much more. Great episode to learn a lot about the product, but also understand what that future of recovery science looks like for athletes. Episodes like this are made possible by ISOFIT, the official sponsor for season 5. For more on ISOFIT, you can check the description below. Enjoy. Jake, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, dude, it's an honor. Always love getting to share more about the Firefly and the journey, the product, and all the above.
Yeah, man, exactly. I mean, it's certainly been something that our athletes have really loved, using and implementing here on the PT and rehab side of things. But, for someone listening that's not familiar with Firefly, or maybe they aren't familiar with you and all the incredible things that you've been doing, Jake, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all that you do?
Yeah, man, I'd love to. Well, first of all, my name is Jake. I've been with Firefly since the beginning, since Anthony, the founder of our company, needed a sales guy. So I was employee number one back in 2018. The product really comes from a medical device. The medical version of Firefly is called the Gecko. The Gecko is actually FDA approved for preventing blood clots, reducing swelling, and healing wounds faster. Anthony at the time, Anthony Genstead, the founder of our company, he was selling sequential compression boots to surgery centers. SCD sleeves, IPC sleeves, for the people listening, those are basically just leg squeezers. He was selling leg squeezers as a part of the post-operative care plans, and was really just getting a lot of complaints from physicians and patients about not tolerating compression boots for 24 hours after surgery, as you can imagine. So he just started looking for alternative products, something that would be a better fit, more patient compliant. And he found this technology out of Europe called the Gecko, that was about the size of a wristwatch and was a lot more effective for reducing swelling and preventing blood clots. So he's really intrigued by the science behind it. Flew out to the UK, saw this incredible technology, brought the Gecko to the US, and started selling this product to the surgery centers. How we got Firefly is the physicians that work for the pro teams in California said, man, this might be a really cool recovery product. In a sense that it's moving blood very effectively. It's great for increasing circulation, and it's about the size of an Apple Watch with no strings, no wires, no attachments. This would be a really effective and convenient modality for us to use in the athletic training rooms for recovery. So Anthony brought the Firefly, which is the same product as Gecko, it's just the over-the-counter version. He brought that to market and started selling it out of his backyard to a couple of teams in California. It just so happened the product was incredible for recovery and travel and the convenience. And we really just built a company since then. And we can dive more into the research and what the product actually is. That's a little brief history of our journey from medical device to recovery tool, and is now being implemented in a lot of different ways. But when I was brought on, it was truly just to knock on doors and to get this product in front of teams, in front of PTs, in front of athletic trainers, in front of sports scientists, sports medicine. Like, we were really just trying to get this product out there. So it's been a fun, long journey so far, but we've really come a long way.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I really like the kind of like small town upbringing, in the sense of like you were literally selling it out of the garage that way. And look at where you're at now. I really like a good success story like that. And you're right, the product really is incredible that way. And it's interesting because a lot of the athletes I've used it with so far, we've kind of compared it to some type of vasopneumatic compression as far as what it was going to do from an effect standpoint. But a lot of them have told me that they feel like it's more effective. And they've kind of told me that they like the fact that, it's not bulky, it doesn't take up space, and they can kind of like move around and go with the device on, as opposed to being restricted to sitting down in a certain area for a period of time that way.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Why is our product effective? Well, it's effortless for the athlete to use, which is huge. And a lot of people are they're confused by the product, and that's because the technology is not very intuitive, and that has always been our Achilles heel, is that we look like one thing, function like another. Like, when I tell people that we compete against compression boots, at first glance, you would not get that. You'd be like, what do you mean? And again, if you guys are listening, if you look up Firefly, you'll notice that it's literally the size of an Apple Watch. So it looks nothing like pneumatic compression. But what's unique about our technology, and I'm just going to kind of dive into a little bit of the research behind it and, what the technology actually does. Basically, what the medical company figured out is that you could actually change the wavelengths and the currents of an NMES signal to be able to safely and comfortably stimulate the peripheral nervous system directly without causing fatigue to the muscle or the nerve. So unlike traditional muscle stims where you're putting electrodes over a muscle group to create muscular contractions and facilitate blood flow to that one area, what the medical company figured out is you could actually stimulate the perineal nerve. And by stimulating the perineal nerve, it would cause the foot to flutter. And those of you that Firefly know the little flutter in the feet that causes this little foot tick. But in the medical world, you're just creating this basically dorsiflexion of the foot and the ankle. So you get that soleus pump and that involuntary ankle pump to move blood back to the heart by using your body's own mechanics. So instead of being stuck in a giant space boot where you're massaging and squeezing the limbs, you could stimulate your nervous system, pump the foot, and actively and dynamically move blood back to the heart. The clinical research, what they found with the technology is it is more effective. You mentioned your athletes feel like it's more effective, and the clinical research actually shows that when you stimulate the perineal nerve directly, it actually increases the microcirculation or the flushing of the limb all the way from hip to toe by 400%, whereas compression was tested at 117. So it's really effective at reducing or at increasing the blood flow in the limbs. And then by getting that little ankle pump, it's actually moving blood back to the heart, similar to walking. So about 32% more venous and arterial flow than compression, or about 62% of ambulation. So it really is very effective at moving blood. And like you mentioned, it's a sticker for the leg. So athletes can be fully mobile. They're not stuck, sitting in the corner in the athletic training room. And that was one of the things that I love most about the product. I played running back in college, so I definitely understand the life of a student athlete, and the time to recover is very, very minimal. You don't have a lot of time to be in the athletic training room or to be focused on recovery. So what we love about the product and what a lot of athletes like about this technology is that they can get all of that blood flow, but not have to be, stationary. They can put the units on, walk around. They can wear it as a part of their everyday lifestyle. So we have a lot of great, advantages to being portable and mobile.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a great point. And, you mentioning about the flutter side or kind of the muscular pump side, just brief anatomy review for people. The perineal nerve, or, the deep branch of it anyways, I believe innervates anterior tib, the extensors of the toes, longus and brevis, one of your peroneus muscles that way, or fibularis muscles, and so on that way. So it's really innervating a lot of these different muscles in a variety of different compartments of the lower leg. So getting that active flutter effect of all of them, you don't really miss anything that I can think of because it's so widespread from a neural distribution standpoint, I feel. And I love that you bring up the point of fluid flow and muscular pump, because this is something we talk about all the time from an isometric training standpoint, right? If I increase the force at which a muscle can contract, then I can essentially move fluid easier. So every time it contracts, it compresses the underlying vasculature at a higher force so that more fluid is going to move back up. But the other piece to that is, as you mentioned, just increasing the amount of those contractions we get. And I think the Firefly device, anytime that you sit down or come to rest, so to speak, kicks in and has that sort of muscle pump effect itself that way, in a more passive sense. It's active in the sense that the muscles are firing, but it's passive in the sense that you don't have to think about it or actively do it or actively push yourself that way. And I think that active passive component is very unique and very essential to the recovery puzzle that way. Is I think a lot of times people look at the more active approaches like, hey, go for your shakeout run, or hey, go to, jump on an assault bike and give us 2 or 3 miles. And not to say that stuff's not important, but from your own experience as an athlete, a lot of athletes are overclocked as it is, and telling them to do more to recover doesn't always work out in the best way, I think.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned the active passive modality, because obviously a lot of the talks around recovery and rehab are really focused on active treatments, right? Getting your body active, getting your body moving. Passivity is is very minimal for the most part. And I think you're also bringing up a good point for us. Where our bread and butter is travel. You think about athletes when they're traveling, and obviously with these conference realignments coming up, there's going to be a lot of travel. There's not a lot of good solutions for athletes on buses for 4, 6, 8 hours, or in the air for 2 to 4 hours at altitude. A lot of that is extremely hard for athletic trainers and for sports science and performance coaches to keep their body. You have a roster of, with football, you're looking at traveling 60 people, right? How do you have those athletes ready to play when they've been traveling in the air? They're getting inflammation, they're getting jet lag, they're getting fatigue. So our product has become a really great solution for treating 40, 50, 60 athletes on a plane, because you're getting constant blood flow, constant active blood flow, even though the athlete is passive at altitude. It's a huge benefit. I know firsthand what it's like. When I played at a school called Sanford University, not Stanford. For those listening, I'm 5'7". Sanford is a small FCS Division I AA school here in Birmingham. It's part of the Southern Conference. And, we did about 9.5-hour bus trips to BMI. And anyone on the call knows that if you're on a bus for 9.5 hours, you're going to get off feeling like a zombie. Your legs are going to be bricks. So having the ability to put on a modality that can increase blood flow. Again, one of the studies shows that just by sitting passive in the firefight, you get 62% of the blood flow you get from walking. That's a tremendous amount of blood flow to get while you're sitting down passive on a bus. And you're non-load bearing, so it's not fatiguing you. It's just getting all that blood and all the fluid, all that reoxygenated blood flow, all the good things that you can get while you're sitting down. It's really going to help a team be more prepared to play. And then obviously post-game, when all the delayed onset muscle soreness is sitting in, as a running back, your legs are destroyed, and you go sit on a 9-hour bus trip after a game, you can imagine, Dan, what the fatigue is like. So having the ability to get recovery immediately post-game, obviously getting even 2 hours of recovery on your way home from a game would be tremendous and would definitely jumpstart your week from a performance standpoint. So that's really where we've hit, our niche. There's a lot of great modalities that athletes can use in the athletic training room, and those are great. But when it comes to being on the road and on the go, it's a lot harder, for teams to get into those recovery windows.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so interesting you bring up the travel component, because the first roundtable podcast we recorded over a year ago last year in the basketball space, having a bunch of different PTs and strength coaches from various professional basketball teams on, that travel component came up. And there was a lot of discussion about, well, how do we prepare and how do we provide for our guys when they're on the road? Because it's a challenge every team faces. But just like you mentioned, it's tough from the college side. It's tough from the pro side. I'll even argue that I think it's even more challenging for my high school athletes that I work with. Up here in Maryland, lacrosse is basically a way of life for a lot of people. Well, a lot of them go on the road for 3 or 4 hours, and then they play 7 or 8 games in a single weekend at a tournament, and then they come back, and then they've got practice the day after they come back. So it's a lot of activity, not just from the travel side, but also a lot of high intense sport activity in a very short amount of time. And from a travel standpoint, it's a lot easier to pack something small that you can slip into a bag easily than it is to pack like a giant set of boots. And you mentioned as well, some teams travel with 50, 60 people, depending on the sport that way. It's very difficult from a PT standpoint or AT standpoint to try and to provide something valuable and meaningful for all of them in the limited time that you get. I think that I speak for everyone when I say we could all benefit from having more time to work with our athletes. I've talked with ATs on the podcast before that say, we get 20 to 30 minutes for 15 guys before our practice. And it's like, how do I provide something valuable for all of them when it averages out to 1 or 2 minutes a person at best? So I think that having the ability to provide something valuable from a recovery standpoint that actually uses our time effectively and efficiently, not just in the athlete sense, like we talked about earlier, where they can move around, but also from the provider and practitioner sense, where I'm essentially freed up and now I'm hands-free. They're doing something that I know is going to move the needle in the direction I want to, and now I can kind of go and shuffle in other places that way.
No, Dan, it's a great point as well, and it's something I've been having conversations with a lot of directors of sports medicine at large colleges. This demand of the student athlete life cycle, right? The student athlete's everyday schedule is increasingly more and more demanding, and the athletic trainers, their lifestyle is more and more demanding. And the discussion is, hey, we can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on these facilities where athletes have these different modalities, but the issue is athletes are not getting the time to utilize these modalities in the athletic training rooms, and those training tables that are filled with, 8, 10, 12, 15 athletic training tables, and there's 120 athletes trying to get treatments. What is the solution? And with that, with the ability, for athletes to get treated away from the facility and get recovery on the go, whether that's in their dorm room or in their life, whether that's in the study hall room, whatever it might be, this is something that the athletic trainers are able to provide continued treatment, provide continued value when the athlete doesn't have time to be in the facility for, longer than the 40 hours a week they're already there. Which
Yeah, no,
40 hours is pretty much how much they're in there for.
No, definitely. I think that's a great point. And the other piece I'll say, we've used it primarily with athletes in sports that are lower extremity dominant or in lower extremity injuries, which we'll get to in a bit. But I guess I'm also wondering, say I have a kid that I'm working with, like a baseball pitcher or something like that, and he gets sore up in the shoulder, elbow, that sort of thing. Is this something that, even though it's down at the leg, could also help recovery up top that way, just through a overall fluid movement standpoint? Or, is this something that's more, lower extremity specific from a recovery standpoint?
Yeah, so we know that we're moving, blood back to the heart and get systemic blood flow, but anecdotally, and this is something we're looking into more with research down the road, but a lot of our baseball teams are using this very similar to the perennial nerve on the peripheral nervous system for the upper extremity. So the product, is being placed over the radial, ulnar, brachial, median. All those nerves are superficial enough for you to stimulate, get a small flutter in the hand. And we know based off of the, hundreds of college and MLB teams we're working with, that's becoming a very common placement. Again, this is anecdotal. So if you go to our website, we don't have any, clinical research yet. But a lot of the feedback we're having from our teams have been, phenomenal from a recovery standpoint. And I've got a lot of pictures on my desktop that teams have shared with me about where they're placing it and what the protocols are. But we know that this is becoming more and more common for our upper extremity focused athletes, just based off an application standpoint of stimulating the peripheral nervous system.
Yeah, no, I love that concept. And I didn't even think about applying it into the upper extremity on upper extremity nerve endpoints that way. But I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting too, because a lot of times when we think about recovery and we think about muscle pump, we always in our head go to lower extremity and think, oh, it's all down there. When in reality, I do think, like I mentioned, there are a lot of upper extremity dominant sports or sports where that upper extremity involvement is very important that way. And I can certainly see a place for this from a recovery standpoint. And, it might be, I don't know what the research is yet. I know you said that you guys are still working on that. It might end up being a placebo type of effect, but let me tell you what, if an athlete looks at me and says, hey, I feel better after I do this, as long as it's not causing them harm in any way, I'm probably not going to stop them from using it because, there's a lot of weird, concoctions of things I've found athletes really like. And I don't always have an explanation as to why, right? Like, I can't really explain why one athlete that I work with really wants a certain part KT taped before he goes out and plays, but he does. I don't think it really does anything, but he feels better when we do it. So it's one of those things where I can't really put a stop to something that's having the effect that I want it to.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I think, the feedback from our athletic trainers has been, hey, this makes sense from from what we know about the product and the science behind it, but it also is something that our athletes keep asking for and demanding that they feel better. This is coming from, we're in 28 of the 30 MLB teams now. This is a product that is becoming well received in those, highest level of communities for both lower and upper extremity recovery. And I think from a athlete standpoint, it's effortless, right? It's a sticker. Basically, it goes directly onto the skin without any pads, wires, attachments. So it's very easy for the athletic trainer to distribute, and it's easy for the athlete to use while they're sitting in the dugout or post outing or whatever it is, there's no limitations to their movement. And I think, again, a lot of the confidence comes behind the fact that the specific product is called if you look up the technology, there's a little sticker that says on pulse, and the on pulse is the specific NMES patent that we have, and it was developed to be able to stimulate the peripheral nerve, the perineal nerve, without causing any fatigue to the muscles. So unlike muscle stems where you're targeting the muscle group, you could lead to fatigue if you overuse it. And I think obviously as athletes, a lot of times you'll see athletes use a muscle stem and pumping up to the highest level they can to competition, right? And they're getting these massive contractions. And I think the benefit to our product is that you can utilize it for 24 hours straight without fatiguing any type of muscle.
That's so interesting, Jake. And on that point as well, what are your typical like parameters around usage of a Firefly that way? What are most teams or athletes reporting to you? Are they using it for the full 24 hours? Are they shooting for, hey, at least an hour a day? Or what's kind of that sweet spot from a usage standpoint?
Yeah, we have a lot of usage guides and things to help, walk through how teams are implementing and what the protocols and parameters are. I'll start with recovery. When you're utilizing this for recovery purposes, we recommend around a 2 to 4 hour wear time. And we did some research to figure out what the most effective dosage was. And this is also on our website if you wanted to go look at this study. But we did a research study with professional rugby players out of Europe. We took a rugby team. We measured what their peak performance level was, and that was based off the creatine kinase in their blood, some subjective and objective measurements. But basically, they were trying to find what is the peak level play before a rugby match, and then how long does it take the rugby players to test back to those peak levels of play after a rugby match. So on average, around 72 hours for the athletes to test back to their peak performance level of play. So about 72 hours is the initial DOMS, or how long it took to recover from DOMS. We then added the Firefly in different increments directly post rugby match to figure out, again, what the most effective dosage is. And when the rugby players wore the device for a 2 to 4 hour window, they tested back to their peak performance level in 28 hours. So it was able to help speed the athlete's DOMS from 72 to 28, which obviously when you think about Olympic sports, a lot of those teams are playing sometimes in less than 72 hours. So having the ability to get your body back to baseline or back to your peak performance level is huge. And leveraging a 2 to 4 hour treatment is really challenging with most modalities. But with the Firefly, again, it's something you could slap on post-workout, post-game. And even though your foot flutters at rest, when you walk, you could be fully ambulatory. And Dan, you can move without, any, it doesn't affect your movement. So you can truly wear it, while you're walking through the airport or, walk around campus, whatever it is. So getting 2 to 4 hours of recovery is not challenging with the unit on. So that's what we recommend from a recovery standpoint, is around 2 to 4 hours. What we noticed, though, is after 4 hours, it didn't really affect the DOMS any faster. So we don't really recommend using it for more than 4 hours for recovery purposes.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I like that kind of 2 to 4 hour window. And I'm really intrigued by your concept on the DOMS side of things, reducing it by literally over 50% if my mental math is correct there on a recovery window time. Because you're right, a lot of teams do play often and frequently, but my mind immediately goes to all the injuries that I see that way, especially ACL. I feel like we see a ton of ACL in the clinic that way, and it's one of those things where, can we ever prevent 100% of them? No. But if the athletes are a little bit more fresh and a little bit more, just overall feeling good, better overall state of mind and state of physical sense going into a competition, could it maybe prevent some of them? I don't know. I don't think anyone can answer that question, straight up factually 100%. But I think that the mechanism is there where we say, hey, athletes are going in less fatigued, fresher, and feeling better. It might help reduce some of those other little injury type things that we see, because I don't think anyone's really cracked the injury code yet. And I think that everyone has been looking at, data and metrics and so on that way, trying to figure it out. And I think that at the end of the day, a fresher, more rested, readily available athlete is probably less likely to get hurt than someone who's fatigued and already just kind of pushing through on their second win that way.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had actually some teams track their injuries utilizing the devices, and the outcomes have been really, really, really good. We just did a study too with the Raging Cajuns football team, Louisiana. where they measured their athletes' performance outcomes using Firefly with a tracking company called Connexon. If you're familiar with Connexon, Connexon is similar to a lot of the tracking companies that teams are utilizing. But what they found using the Firefly and Connexon is they measured each athlete's performance outcomes with 4 different metrics. And I'll share this with you, Dan. And this is also on our website as well. As they did their 1 and 2 deep roster during OTAs. So they took 3 weeks of OTAs, did their 1 and 2 deep roster. They put the Firefly on each individual player with each position group for 2 hours after practice, basically every practice for the 2 weeks of OTAs, and measured the 4 different metrics using Connexon, which was like their acceleration, metabolic power per mass, and then overall acceleration and speed. And I can't remember the exact measurements that were taken, but basically what they found after the 3 weeks of OTAs is that the athlete group that wore the Firefly for 2 hours after practice actually increased in all 4 performance metrics over the ones that didn't. And they switched position groups and the same thing happened. So it was really cool to see. This wasn't measuring, again, injuries, but it was measuring athletes' performance outcomes, which is huge, when it comes to, a sport like football. And I think more and more people will see that.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want athletes to buy into something, show them it'll enhance their performance on field. I mean, that's easy, low-hanging fruit that way. So that's a really incredible, powerful set of data that you just outlined there. And I think it speaks to that point that, a lot of strength coaches, PTs, ATs, we always talk about with our athletes, but it's really hard to get them to buy into this concept of recovery in the sense of, it's not as cool, it's not as sexy as hitting a PR in the gym. But if you make it really easily accessible to the point where they don't even have to think about it, and you show them it helps them perform at a higher level, that's really easy buy-in. In fact, you don't really need to work at all to sell that. It's like, hey, put this on, go about your day, done.
Yeah, and I mean, again, having a background of being a student athlete, you're right. The recovery is not focused on. I mean, my view of recovery was a foam roller for 10 minutes and a couple, 10-minute stretches before games. And then the rest of the year, you're kind of just putting duct tape on. Now, when I was super fatigued, I would try to get into the athletic training room and leverage a compression boot or a stim unit. But to be honest, at small schools, right, you have two pairs of whatever it is, and you're balancing, trying to get in with 120 athletes trying to get recovery too. So you end up just putting it off, and basically just putting duct tape on for the season, trying to survive. So recovery is kind of a nebulous cloud where there's not much structure to it. You're just going as long as you can until you're injured, pretty much, right? You're like, okay, I'm not unable to play, so I don't need recovery. That's what it usually gets to. Like I can still get on the field. I'm not immobile, so I guess recovery is not a big deal. So I think there's more and more education and awareness coming out, obviously with the pro athletes that are advocating how much they're spending on their body and how much time they're spending recovering. I think we're now in a really unique space in the sports world where that is changing. When I played from 2012 to 2016, there was not much talk around recovery or tracking. I know like Stanford has Catapult now. Stanford's utilizing these data, and we're making steps to help athletes know when they're in the red and when they do need to focus on recovery. So I do think the focus is definitely becoming more and more towards how do we create the most ready to perform student athlete.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's so interesting too that you mentioned the point that pro athletes are advocating a lot for recovery, and I'm so glad that they are. And pro athletes, they engage in stuff at an incredibly high intensity. But I'm finding that a lot of the high school and college athletes actually have higher workloads than some of the pro athletes that I've worked with. And maybe it's just me and my limited sample size here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, but I find a lot of them overall hours of activity put in. A lot of the high school and college kids are putting in more hours than those at the pro level. And I'm not sure if it's just this travel team culture or if it's, the increased competitiveness to get into, the next level of sports that way. I'm not sure what the one primary driver beyond that is. But I certainly think that the recovery concept becomes just as important, if not more important, than all of this additional push to get the athletes involved in more competition and more practice that way, right? Like there's kids that we've worked with from a baseball standpoint, for example, where they're playing, school ball and they're playing travel ball and they're guest playing on another travel team. Well, none of those coaches, I'm assuming, are talking with each other and saying, hey, this is what we did, this is the workload and all that. And if you ask a kid as a coach, hey, are you good to go? Kid's not going to know any better. They're going to say, oh, yeah, I'm ready, even though they just pitched a whole game the day before. So understanding that, this workload concept, although everyone thinks it's a pro athlete thing or it's only a D1 athlete thing, it's really every athlete at every level. And I think we really underestimate just how much some of the high school and college kids are doing from an activity standpoint and undervalue how important physical recovery is to them. I mean, plain and simple, I'm seeing 12 and 13-year-olds with ACL and UCL injuries. And that's something that I don't feel like was documented extensively 10 to 15 years ago. So there's got to be something we're missing and something more we can do to help change the trend of that from an injury standpoint.
That's a really unique point because I've got, some of my best friends, my best friend, he has 3 daughters and they're all playing on these elite soccer travel clubs. One is even playing for like one of the Team USA soccer travel teams, and their schedule is truly, they're flying all over the country weekly, and they're 11, 12 years old. So it is incredibly different than how it used to be in the past. And a lot of these kids are suffering with injuries regularly. It also has to do with the fact, when they're going to these tournaments and their coaches, like, recovery is not being talked about, and there's not many athletic trainers or PTs around, these tournaments to help, like the college level. So and especially in the high school setting, I mean, you have one athletic trainer and thousands of athletes for the most part, right? So I think even more so, the demand for high school athletes to be educated or even given the opportunity to recover is a huge advantage for high schools that have that.
Great point. And it's so interesting to see how this sports world has evolved over the past several years and how it will continue to evolve. And, I brought up the point on rehab before. And, like I told you before we even jumped on recording that way, it's been great for us to kind of see, athletes giving us positive feedback on this from a post-injury recovery standpoint. Is I think anytime you consider lower extremity surgery that way, I don't care if it's ACL, meniscus, fasciotomy, Achilles, whatever it is that way, you get a significant amount of effusion in that surgical area, in the knee or so on that way. And it tends to back up down the lower extremity. And I think that having this sort of option where it's a active muscle pump sort of system to get that fluid out of there, it's made a huge difference for the athletes that we've utilized it with thus far. And, on that note as well, I think that from a provider standpoint, obviously you have to be careful with who you use this with, right? You still have to examine things. You still have to make sure, hey, there's no blood clots. There's nothing that would, restrict me from using this. Or, since this is an e-stim device that way, I would imagine if an athlete has like a pacemaker or something of that sort, we're probably not going to use it. But in the absence of those kind of typical post-operative red flags, I think this is such a great tool to help reduce that effusion in a manner that seems to be much better tolerated than some of the other mechanisms to reduce post-operative effusion. And I think that, in time, at least here clinically, I think the results are going to show from it as well, because we know that effusion carries on a very strong muscular inhibition standpoint that way, right? Like if my knee is really swollen, I'm probably not going to be able to engage my quad muscle the same way. So if I can get that fluid out of the leg quicker and faster, then I'm actually able to, rebuild meaningful quad strength earlier on and, fight that good fight against arthrogenic muscular inhibition better than I would if the fluid kind of sat in there for another week or so.
Yeah, and it's unique because it's something where the PT, the AT can facilitate 24 hours of treatment, right? And that was my next point. Obviously recovery 2 to 4 hours, injuries, and now that you brought it up, it just kind of leads to it.
you could leverage this device for 24 hours straight. If you had, like you mentioned, an injury that you were dealing with and you're trying to get that out, that athlete could truly put it on and wear it overnight. They could sleep in the unit if they can, wear it as much as possible. Because, think about if you're the PT or the AT for a school or a pro team, and you could tell the head coach, like, hey, our starting point guard has an ankle sprain. Well, hey, coach, I'm going to be able to get him 24 hours of around-the-clock treatment. You're going to look pretty good. That's going to be a really good advantage, because most people are coming in for an hour doing treatment, and then what happens with an ankle sprain after treatment when you go sit down or sit in class for hours, right? It gets stiff and it swells right back up. And then you're, kind of starting over each day. So I think this is something that, ATs and PTs are having really good success with, just using as extended treatments when they're not in the PT or the ATC room.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And, I feel like we've done a great job of covering a variety of different research points and clinical applications that way, especially from a injury standpoint, recovery standpoint. But I guess I got to wonder, has there been any kind of cool, unique applications that you might not have thought of originally that you've seen from Firefly, or any way that, a team or a group is using this that you're kind of like just fascinated by, or kind of go, wow, I didn't think of using Firefly for that before?
Yeah, it's becoming an interesting warm-up device. I had a conversation I live in Birmingham, so the Alabama football staff is, right down the road from me. And I usually meet with their team and really just discuss, hey, how are you guys utilizing the product? Like, what do you guys seeing benefits with? And it was last year or a year or two ago, I was sitting down with one of their athletic trainers, and he mentioned one of the things they're having success with is utilizing this pre-practice in their film sessions. So, he said one of their kind of issues was, and if you're a football player on this call, or you're listening in, the typical schedule is you get your ankles taped, right? You come into the athletic training room, you get your ankles taped, and then you go sit in pre-practice meetings for usually around 1 to 3 hours, depending on what day it is. So you're in really tight tape, getting hardly any blood flow to your feet, and then you're sitting down, meetings for about 2 hours before your strength coach is yelling his head off for you to sprint onto the field. So you're getting yelled out to sprint onto the field. You sprint on the field. And I remember even when I was playing, how stiff I would feel after ankle tape and 2 hours of meetings, getting no blood flow to your legs, really. And I think what's been unique is that teams have started to leverage that passivity or that downtime with getting Firefly to get just to get some blood moving, get the system primed to be able to compete. And we're also hearing this becoming a regular modality for teams during March Madness, while they're sitting around watching other games compete until 9 p.m. at night. It's hard for the athletic trainer to keep their body, ready to play from, 7 a.m. till 9 p.m. at night. So a lot of teams have started utilizing the Firefly as a unique way to get the body primed and warmed up to compete. And this is even happening at the Olympic level with track and field athletes. Track and field athletes that are doing multiple events in a day, they're having to warm up and cool down and compete from 0 to 100 multiple times during the day. So teams have really started putting this on a couple of minutes, 30, 40 minutes before the race to get, their body ready to go to the 100%. So it has become something really interesting that we've started hearing more and more of teams utilizing this as a warm-up device. We have no research, like you mentioned. This is just a unique, kind of conversation that we're hearing that teams are having, but the feedback's been really good.
Yeah, no, I really love that application point. I think that makes a lot of sense. And, my mind also goes to, hey, could we have it on people when they're on the sidelines in the game, right? Like, hey, my offense just came off the field, my defense went on, and my defense is on the field for, 12 minutes trying to put up a stand, but they can't stop the other team. Well, what are we doing in those 12 minutes, right? Like, are guys just sitting around, or could we have something in place where we could at least get a little bit of, that hybrid passive active type of recovery in game that way? Because this is something, like we've talked about, it doesn't really take up much physical space, if any at all. So could it be something where we very quickly, and easily put it on in the game moment that way on the sideline standpoint? And I'm sure, different sporting leagues might have rules and regulations on what you can versus can't have sideline that way. But if it's allowed, I could certainly see a good potential benefit there, just from more of like a in-game acute recovery even.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, it's kind of like you see all the players with giant ice bags on their knees on the sideline, right? We've been seeing that for years, so it could be really easy for. And I think we've had some feedback from teams, putting on pretty regularly. Whether that team is I had a women's soccer team last year discuss how some of their athletes like to sit with the units on the sideline, before they were going to come into the game and would put them on. So we're hearing more teams start to utilize it that capacity, and especially just how easy it is to put on and off.
Jake, I feel like we've covered a lot of different ground as it relates to Firefly today, and maybe even some other good points that we didn't plan on covering as well. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts or closing remarks or anything we might have missed as we were chatting today?
No, man, I think it's, recovery is it's a nebulous cloud. We're just a tool in the toolbox. I think there's a lot of great modalities. First and foremost, you have your sleep and your nutrition. I always like to, when we're on these calls, just to remind people recovery is a lot of different aspects that go into it. But I do think we have a really unique product that's effortless and can be utilized in a lot of different settings. If you want to learn more about the product, our website has a lot of great information. It's just recoveryfirefly.com or fireflyrecovery.com. Either one will get you to the website. And then if you want to just drop my email, Dan, to the listeners, you can feel free to reach out to me for questions. And we offer some samples for teams and athletic trainers that want to try the product out. We're happy to do that. And I'm also happy to connect you with other people in my network for their direct feedback. I know actually Maryland Cross is a big user of the product. So for all the Maryland teams out there. And one thing we didn't get into, Dan, but just I wanted to mention real quick, the product it's a 30-hour unit. It comes with 2 units, one for each leg. So when you're looking at the modality, it's got a 30-hour life cycle, which again, most teams are utilizing this for about 2 to 4 hours. So it should get you about 7 to 15 treatments, maybe a little more, depending on how much you're using it for recovery. So it is multi-use. You can use it over and over again, but after 30 hours, you'll get a new pair. And we sell these on our website. A pack of Firefly, it's a little over $40 on the website. And we offer obviously team discounts and everything. So it's not an expensive modality. It's something that, like you said, these are a modality that athletes at all levels can afford, which makes it really nice too.
Yeah, as you say that, my mind goes right to the amount of PT clinics I've seen that have spent $3,000 or $4,000 on a single ultrasound unit. And I'll be honest, I don't really know what ultrasound does. I haven't really felt any effects from it myself that way. And I think that the amount of Firefly you could get for that same price is, it's a night and day difference that way. So I certainly love that point. And, we'll link to all of the resources that you mentioned there from the Firefly website to your email and so on that way in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there. Jake, this was awesome, man. I really appreciate your time and everything that you guys are doing.
Yeah, same, man. Appreciate you having me on, and thanks for helping us spread a little awareness.